are listening to Just Roll With It.
Another LoreStop episode of Just Roll With It, where we're going to talk with the Ogier expert of all things rather than the God creator of all things.
Right. This is probably more of a personality stop rather than a lore stop.
Right, yeah, we need to come up with a generic name.
Yeah, and also we need to be wary of straying into things which might tread on the toes of Loremaster in his world creation. If I start randomly creating specific forests or making up certain things in the world that don't actually exist or that he doesn't know about up until I've made them up.
He might appreciate it, honestly. More creativity in the world building. We'll see.
That's true. And I've noticed from listening to the first series of Just Roll With It, that Loremaster's understanding of forest ecology is fairly rudimentary. Like, I don't know if that's insulting or not, but he does his best. He's just not as well. He's not trained in it.
I remember that episode where he was talking about he couldn't make up if it was basalt or obsidian, and you were in the chat like, make up your mind. I was in the actual game like, make up your mind. What is it? You can't have both. These aren't the same thing. I know they're both black, but
opposite end of the spectrum almost. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, if we make up details, I'd say just roll with it.
Roll with it.
And
very nice.
Does this actually run counter to what you have, or does this fill in a blank on the map? Because creativity.
A blank that you didn't know existed.
Right. We just found a problem and made a solution. Ta-da!
Yes. Oh, I was thinking about this when making some notes ahead of time, that RJ doesn't touch much on the natural world around him. He mentions rocks or mountains in passing. He mentions leatherleafs a lot, and oaks and pines. But he doesn't talk very much about how humans engage with the natural world, apart from maybe sheep farming or the fact that crops are grown.
Yeah.
That we don't know much about where any of these resources that they're using come from. I believe there's a section where Elaine is talking about the discovery of resources somewhere in northern Andor, and that's going to be useful in terms of money flow, cash flow, but there's nothing about forest management in the entire series.
Well, no, there's Loyal being angry at the Tyrants for cutting down a forest. That's about it. Because the environmentalists like, no.
Yeah, that's my sense, is that the natural resources in Randland they're not so much managed, they're exploited. They're still in, it seems that even though they have these cities which have been there, in some cases, for thousands of years, built atop each other, the rest of their society is still very much in pioneer adventurers in cutting everything down that they can find and using it, because there's still so much of it. If you look at a map of Randland, there's lots of forests.
Yeah, because the human population is shrinking, right?
Exactly.
They're in decline, their territory is shrinking, so you don't need to manage resources. Like, they're taking over everything.
Yeah, right.
It's got a bit of that climate environmentalism in there with the Dark One's touch, but that's about the extent of his care for the natural world.
Yeah.
He's no Tolkien.
No, it's certainly not. And
not in that regard.
It's very different having massive areas of rangeland that people are just leaving unclaimed because there aren't enough people there, and certainly because civilizations seem to be dying out, and if you are of the Ingtar persuasion, then they're doomed to fail anyway, so we should just side with the Dark One.
Yeah.
But that's going down a whole other rabbit warren.
Indeed. And it's got to be even worse now in the Fourth Age, because there was even more population decrease because of the last battle.
Yeah, so in some ways, although we found that mine that Andre was exploiting, even though he has no business being there, really, we do need people to be going out and just reclaiming areas of the land. We, as in, if humanity wants to survive in Randland. That's one argument.
Debatable.
Yes, do they deserve to? Is entirely another question.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I can't even remember why we got onto this tangent, but
because coffee?
Possibly so. Or water. I didn't have time to brew any tea.
What is wrong with you, man? I
don't know. I got in. I did some stuff around the house and then forgot to brew tea. Critical error. First, what do you think we should begin with?
Why Quercus left the stedding? What's the motivation to go out into the world?
So, Quercus is 100 years old, so he is older than Loyal was when he left the stedding. but he's still very young, and he noticed, it's fairly hard to miss it, but since the last battle, there has been this divide within Ogier kind, where the younger Ogier sort of interpret the Dragon Reborn by Loyal as being this demonstration of the value of going out into the world and adventuring and exploring, because look what happened, we helped save the entire pattern. And clearly the elders want to stamp down on that as much as they can, otherwise they'll have young Ogier running around and not being in the stedding. So as I see it, Quercus was part of the pro-adventuring lobby, but he's also, even by Ogier standards, he's quite retiring. He likes discovering new things. He's a scientist, but he also prefers the peace and quiet of the forests and the world around him to, say, becoming a stonemason and going to help rebuild all of these cities. I imagine that if Ogier wanted to, they could earn a reasonable income from just rebuilding Camelin.
Yeah.
Which was Ogier built in the first place. So he is much more of the persuasion that says, we don't know anything about this particular topic, or there is not much research on this particular topic. This gives me an opportunity to go out into the world and explore, but I will explore in the nice, beautiful areas outside of, or on the borders of civilization, rather than within the grime and the noise and the hustle and bustle of human civilization.
And there's way more to discover if you go to this like newly de-blighted area than just cataloging where people have been this whole time.
Definitely. The whole regrowth of, if you think about it, for any population, but particularly for Ogier, the re-establishment of life in the Blight and the reclamation of the ecosystems that existed there previous to the Blight must just be this fascinating once in a lifetime, once in an age, once in many ages, maybe once in a turning of the wheel opportunity to study this phenomenon. So you've got to get out there and explore it. So anyway, that's why he left the stedding, because essentially he was caught up in all of this youthful exuberance over the writings of Loyal and the possibilities of adventuring and seeing the world, and doing it through the lens of a forest ecologist and botanist.
And so Loyal's like middle-aged for an Ogier at this point, yeah?
Yeah, if he was, 90 when the events of the books occurred, he would be young middle-aged, I would say. Do we ever actually find out how long Ogier live?
I want to say it's like 700 years is as old as they get, but that's mostly just off the top of my head. So he would be in the younger side, and probably encouraging people to go explore rather than stay home and hide.
And he's done his tour around all of the steadings, talking about his adventures. So
right.
Doing the self-promotion.
I love the book tour.
Yes, exactly.
It's so fabulous. Do you know how well his book sales are outside of the stedding?
I bet his book is...
I mean, Tedric has a copy, so...
I was just thinking, his book would be required reading of anyone who's in that maybe merchant class or above. Can you imagine it being on Tam's mantelpiece back in the Two Rivers, or... Actually, that's a bad question. It would be.
Well, the Two Rivers has a special place with respect to... Yeah. But as far as, like, some random town in, I don't know, Mirandy, where certain other characters grew up, probably not.
They don't care about anything educational in Mirandy, though, do they? Don't they just shoot people and drink
Precisely.
And carouse?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd never heard of this book before, or Pimer had never heard of this book. Yeah. I'm sure Amena had heard of it because she's all like noble and whatever.
Right. It would be required reading in any noble's house.
Undoubtedly, the Children of the Light also study it because it's a good account of the dragon, right? So probably Pimer's the only one who hadn't read it before the story opened.
Yeah. But would the Children of the Light have been... How would they have been portrayed in The Dragon Reborn? Because you can retell the...
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I could see Loyal being a little bit more accurate than the revised children would want. Where they're like, no, we're putting that behind us. Let's study the abridged version.
Yes, that's
it just talks about the dragon. We'll ignore all the other parts.
Yeah. Skip Pedron Nile, skip Aemon Valda, and just cut straight to Galad. And then
yeah, pretty much.
So Loyal has this idea to go... Quercus has this idea to go out and study the great trees and the community ecology in all of the steadings in Randland. We don't know what happens to Shara, as far as I'm aware, after the breaking, or after the last battle.
Not either.
Yeah, basically, anytime. I would imagine that there would have been steading there at some stage. I mean...
Yeah, one would think.
Yeah, even probably in the waste, there must have been steading at some point. It wasn't entirely covered by this inland sea, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, wow. Desert ecology in a stedding. I want to know about all of the things now.
That may be more of the stedding was destroyed by natural forces rather than humans denigrating it. But
It could be an oasis. I mean, these are things.
Yes, that's true. What, in one of these little...
You could have great cigarros or something instead of great trees.
Yeah, just tucked in one of the clefts in between two great mesas in the middle of, Cold Rock's Hold area.
Yeah, but it does seem... The fact that we don't hear about it would imply that they don't exist.
Yes, and some parts of the Isle Waste we know were underwater during the Age of Legends.
Right, there's the whole waterless sands at the south. That could totally have swallowed a stedding, because, if it's under... like 30 meters of sand, it's not going to be doing so great.
No. So if we just think of primarily the steadings around Randland, then Quercus's idea was to explore the role of great trees in those steading. We know that when Ogier established steading after the breaking, they tried to plant specimens of as many species as possible, or as many species as they could grow, as the climate would allow in that area. There's some discussion of that in The Eye of the World, which is a slightly unusual philosophy, basically trying to plant as many species as you can in the area, rather than maybe sticking with what the area has to start with. But Quercus is interested in the variation in the different plant assemblages that are associated with great trees throughout Randland. And we know that the climate varies enormously from, say, the steadings in the Spine of the World over to the steadings on Toman Head, and particularly from the steading near Tyr, or former steading near Tyr, to up in the Mountains of Doom, which probably aren't called the Mountains of Doom anymore because there's no doom beyond them.
There's no doom.
Yeah, there's no doom. Anyway, that's his purpose, that there's this variation in climate, and that should produce variation in the assemblages of species which grow alongside great trees. But no one has actually catalogued this. The Ogier are reticent of, or for the last few thousand years, have been reticent of exploring too far beyond their steading because of the longing. So there isn't a great deal of collected repository of information on steading composition throughout Randland. And of particular interest is whether the great trees are... We know that they're rather unique organisms, particularly because of their great size, their age. Do they modify the community around them? How plastic are they to their environment, rather than sort of creating their own environment that allows other species to thrive alongside them? And if the latter, if they can modify the environment around them and create specific environmental conditions which are associated with great trees, then you would think that the plants that grow around them might be shielded from some of that climate variation throughout Randland, like a buffering effect that would tend to produce fairly similar species assemblages. But on the other hand, if great trees are very plastic to their surroundings, then maybe there is a lot more variation in the plant species with which they associate from north to south in Randland.
Right. So is a great tree, like, what even makes a tree great? Like, it's not a species. It's not a magical effect.
I suspect it is.
Oh, it is? Great trees are an actual, like, specific species. I always assumed they were, like, uber beeches or whatever. Uber oak, uber beech, uber leatherleaf. I didn't quite think of them as a single species.
I think they are a single species, and they're certainly capitalized in the books. I read somewhere on one of the Theoryland, one of the sites, that someone was saying that great trees were deciduous broadleaf trees, so they could be uber beeches. But if you just look at the largest species on Earth currently, and great trees are not dissimilar in size to the largest redwoods. If you do some of the calculations, they're not an order of magnitude larger than some of the largest redwoods, but they are consistently described as being that incredible size, rather than redwoods where there's, they have the potential to grow to that size, but they don't all make it. Which is, by the way, what you'd expect in any natural population. Unless great trees had this, normally they were the size of the largest redwoods, but they had the potential to grow a lot larger, and that could well be the case. Anyway, I'm deviating from the subject, which is that most of the tallest and the most massive tree species on Earth at the moment are gymnosperms. They're evergreen softwoods. So if you think of coast redwood, giant sequoia, which is the most massive tree in terms of volume. Eucalyptus regnans is the one exception, and that's down in Australia. Shout out to all of our Australian listeners.
Indeed.
Can't believe I ever got the chance to say that word. Shout out. I'm not a professional podcaster. Anyway, so Eucalyptus regnans is extraordinary, and it's enormous. Some records put it to be the tallest tree in the world, right up there with coast redwood. It depends on whose accounts you believe, because none of the species currently standing are the largest.
Right.
As far as I'm aware, the current consensus is that coast redwood is and has the largest currently living specimen. But the overall trend is that most of the largest species in terms of mass and height are coniferous, and that's partly a function of the way that conifers transport water up their stems. And without getting too much into plant physiology, the current conifers have lots of specific adaptations that help reduce the risks of your water conducting vessels becoming unable to transport water.
Right, because it has to go like a very long way up.
And water transport in plants the beauty of it is that it's generally done without any energy involved. It's just based on physics, basically, of the way that particles...
They don't have hearts.
Right, but they don't have to pump in any of their own energy. The sugars that they produce through photosynthesis, they don't have to use any of those to transport water up. It's an incredibly ingenious passive transport system that's based on the incredibly strong force between molecules of water. But that system can obviously become broken when you have conditions of extreme drought, when your plant is suffering problems with disease and stress, and also it is increasingly difficult to transport water up to higher heights. So lots of the current conifers have these adaptations that allow them to still conduct water up to incredible heights without risks of the foliage at the top becoming unable to conduct and transpire and photosynthesize. So I suspect that great trees they were more likely to survive if they're coniferous. So if you model them after a giant sequoia. And this is where it gets into debates about what the books actually say and whether they're actually described in any great detail.
And if RJ was just wrong.
Yeah, or inconsistent, more likely in his thinking. But he probably didn't give a great deal of thought.
Yeah, because visually a big, broad tree with like these sweeping, leaves is going to be much more visually stunning as a writer, even if it's not more plant physiologically possible. I
think that's right. But I can't even recall any descriptions of great trees in the books, aside from that they were enormous. I really can't think of even a description where you get information on like the leaves. I can't recall a passage that says, and there were fallen leaves around, for example, or what type of what the bark looks like.
Yeah, I agree. I think we only get the diameter and the height in the vaguest of terms. And other than that, just fill in the blank, your most favorite image of a tree, and poof, you're good to go.
Basically that.
But he does mention that they're very park-like, like that you are maintaining the space under them, which seems very, again, not great for forest ecology. Like, 17th century French lawns are not actually good for soil health. So,
but some species naturally produce more shaded understories than others. And for example, coast redwoods, they have an incredibly high leaf area index, which is a measure of how much light is hitting the foliage down the tree. Yet, because of the way that the foliage grows in those, the angles of foliage and its distribution throughout the forest. Some studies have shown there's actually a higher than you would expect amount of light at the forest floor, where other species like beech, which you mentioned before, which are shade tolerant, so they also maintain lots of foliage right down their trunk. If you look at the understory of a beech woodland, it will be very, very bare because very little can grow under beech woodland because there's not as much light. It's not that they pump down chemicals like walnuts do, it's just that there's not as much light for beeches for anything to grow underneath them. So again, this is an area that we just have to make up in our own minds or speculate. What I would say is that unless the ogier are maintaining the cut surfaces of stumps of great trees with some sort of chemicals that, if they're really treating them to make them last longer, then it is generally less realistic for a deciduous broadleaf tree to produce a surface that would resist decay as well as many of the softwoods, particularly species like some of the false cedars and cypresses. Some species of hardwoods do resist decay very well, but in general, if you look at the decay times, the wood decay times of conifers, many of them are a lot longer than hardwoods. So that's another line of evidence that leads me to suggest that great trees are unlikely to be deciduous broadleaf trees.
Yeah. It also makes it a more timeless feeling, right? If the trees aren't dropping their leaves like every time you turn around.
That's right. Can you even imagine walking underneath the depth of dead leaves that you would have on the understory of a forest where you have these great trees that have enormous amounts of foliage.
That'd be a lot of work to deal with, to clean up, to not be a fire hazard for all the homes that are it'd be like a blizzard, but of leaves, right? Like digging yourself out.
Visions of these good wives, or what's the male equivalent, a good gentleman, with their rakes sweeping leaves out of the way in the fall in ogier stedding. So
you've convinced me. They have to be conifers. It's a thing now. We're headcanoning this.
And evergreen conifers at that. So I would like to, or Quercus would like to study the associations of other species around great trees and how variable great trees growth and the dimensions, the phenology, how variable this is from stedding to stedding. That's his overall objective of going out into the world.
Nice. I just realized I was totally conflagrating groves and stedding when I was talking about tier. They are not the same thing.
Right.
The groves are where they tried to do the maximum biodiversity and all of that, and that's where they would grow the waygates to. The stedding, you don't get to move those. You don't get to build them. Stedding just are.
You're right. I wonder if I was conflating them as well.
I mean, I would think that the ogier would go for maximum biodiversity in their management of an area, whether it's stedding or grove. But the grove is where we get the description of maximum spread.
Yeah, that may be the case. You're right, it is. I need to go back to the passage in the Eye of the World. I think also RJ's language may have tightened up throughout the series. This may be one area where his thoughts were developing, but I thought I should have made a note of the page. But I thought when I was rereading The Eye of the World a couple of months ago that there was a passage that referred to ogier regrowing or growing new stedding, which really surprised me. Yeah, I read it and thought, that sounds inconsistent with what I thought was the case, because obviously if you have the longing and you can just you have the power to grow a stedding, why would you do that? Maybe I'm confusing.
Well, there's rediscovering stedding.
Yeah.
I feel like there is some talk about reestablishing stedding, like they found one that had completely gone to seed or whatever, and they're able to rebuild it.
Maybe any of our listeners can identify the passage in the Eye of the World. I need to go back and find it now, but I wish I'd been more thorough in taking notes.
It's either in the Eye of the World or the Great Hunt. That's where we get most of our data from Loyal.
I think this was the Eye of the World.
Probably he's explaining everything to Rand for the first time.
Yeah, it could have been that when they were sitting together in the inn in Camelon, the Queen's
Blessing.
Queen's Blessing. So that's why Quercus is outside and doing things, and then he's become sidetracked going to Dal Shirandu to start with, which is where he meets our other adventurers.
So why did he start at Dal Shirandu? Is that because it's one of those newly exposed, newly discovered ones? due to the lack of the blight?
That's part of it. Remember also, Quercus is from nearby Arafel. So New Malkir existed north of parts of Arafel as well, which is what I often forget when I'm reading the series, that I associate Malkir with being just north of Shinar, but it was north of most of Arafel and Shinar as well. And Quercus is from stedding Shirandu, which is in one of two steddings in Arafel. So this stedding in New Malkir was also relatively close to his homesteading. So it made a nice starting point. But there's also lots of additional research questions that could be answered in each stedding, and particularly in the stedding near where our adventures take place.
So we just got lucky that we happened to be close to where Quercus was starting out. That was
Yes.
It's not particularly choice-based thing. It's just like, it's nearby.
Right. And I realised I just got... So they're so similar in names, but Quercus is from stedding Shanjing, and I said stedding Shirandu because they both start with an S, and because I keep getting confused. So...
Yeah, I thought I was confused, so...
No.
So we are the first stedding that Quercus has gone to, then, or the first area.
Definitely. He's only been outside his stedding for a matter of months, which is why he's having so many new discoveries when he's bumping into you.
Right.
And not been to a bar before, not seen much of humanity, really. He's just seen trees, and he's been camped out in his stedding in Dal Shirandu for most of the time. He journeyed a little bit, didn't make his way with any great haste because this was the start of an adventure, and he just thought he'd enjoy himself exploring all of the habitats outside of his homesteading, and then pitched his camp at Dal Shirandu, stedding Shirandu, and has been exploring the regrowing stedding ever since. And he has his research is going to start with a general inventory of what's already there.
Naturally.
Yes, you want to know what's there before you start digging into any detailed questions. But he's particularly interested in whether the amount of regrowth firstly, is there regrowth of the stedding after the blight recedes? Then finding that there is, he is interested in calculating some form of metric of stedding regrowth, and also beyond the stedding as well. If you can maybe calculate how fast the plants are regrowing versus what you would expect in an area which hadn't been affected by the blight, you can get some kind of idea of the influence of the Dark One on the vegetation that was growing in the blighted area. And he has this rather grandiose idea that if he were to look at other steddings which had similarly been swallowed by the blight, either in Randland or maybe over in the Isle Waste, or the blighted area north of the Isle Waste, then you could get some kind of metric as to how fast the Dark One's touch was receding. Because we're left with very little information at the end of A Memory of Light as to what happens to the Dark One and the other remaining shadows.
Right. And like, were there species that like were surviving the blighting that have now got some interesting adaptations that like don't need to, they're not directly the result of the Dark One, they're like secondary and tertiary effects?
You're right. Yes, because when you see in The Eye of the World, when they go exploring into the blight, and Lan refers frequently to these other creatures which are in the high passes and which the worms are afraid of. And we know that worms they're a construct, aren't they? They were created by Aginor.
Yeah, they're the immature stage of a Jumara.
Right. I can't remember
whatever the fuck a Jumara is.
Yeah.
We see a Jumara in the short story where Demon Dread goes to get Sakarnan. He sees like a full-grown Jumara, and it's like this creature that it's awesome. I think he goes into a cave that like it can't get out of because it's so big, but he just kills it and takes the prize. So I've only read this story once, but I remember being like, oh my God, we get to see what a full-grown Jumara looks like. And then it was like 3 details and then it was dead. So
yeah, disappointing. Was that something written by Brandon, or did RJ write that?
I believe it's written by Brandon. It definitely has more of a Brandon feel to it, but I've only read it the once. Okay. So somebody yell at us for that in the comments.
Yeah. So many areas in which our knowledge is lacking. Speaking for myself, not for you. You are obviously the fount of all knowledge on the Wheel of Time.
It drops off the farther we get into the series, the less number of times I've gone through it. So, you know.
We all need to really get our act together for JordanCon if we're to best.
Oh my God,
competition.
seriously.
Yeah. I was originally thinking I could get a reread done by JordanCon, but there's no way. At the moment, I would need to read about 200 pages a day to be on that level. And I just don't have time to do that.
Yeah, it's not technically impossible, but if you want to have a life, then...
Yeah, interact with other people. But getting back to the other creatures, that's a really interesting thought, because we're told about worms and other constructs of the Dark One, but there's all of this other wildlife up there which has been developing as a result of the taint in the Blight. And we see it, or we read a couple of examples in The Eye of the World, which sound terrifying. And
I am a stick.
Right. Yeah. But you would have thought that those creatures would would have a fair competitive advantage over creatures that don't have to live with everything around them trying to kill them all the time, as is the case in the Blight.
Right, and 3,000 years isn't that long for evolution to take place, but if we're talking like insects or whatever, they have so many generations within just a couple years that...
Right, and if you're thinking about the influence of the Dark One, setting aside evolution, I imagine the Dark One's touch as being something like the influence of, radiation or cancers in terms of influencing the body's development over a short period of time, and that you could end up with these weird monstrosities which are adapted to live in the blighted area.
Yeah, they have to be influencing the plants around them and the insects around them, and the cascading effects out to make a very unique blight-flavored ecology, if you will.
Blight-flavored ecology, yeah. So that would be really interesting, actually, to explore how... I wonder if LoreMaster would allow us to do that, to explore what lies up there, and whether all of the plant ecology and the non-plant ecology is dying as a result of the blight receding, or whether the existing trees in the blight, the existing vegetation, is just becoming healthy again, like we see with the return of spring in Eye of the World, where everything looks perkier after Ramses used the Eye of the World, or whether new vegetation springs up, and if so, how fast is that vegetation growing compared to what it would have been growing, or how fast it would have grown in non-blighted areas. Right,
and like how quickly are non-blighted areas like able to colonize in to the blighted areas.
Yeah, and you could imagine that if you took, as a research idea, if you took the whole of the strip of the blight and then you compared vegetation growth rates and accounted for various other climate and physiographic factors, that you could maybe come up with some kind of metric that shows how fast the Dark One's touch is receding from different areas, whether it's receding uniformly or whether there's like you imagine Shale Ghul as the center, and there's this circle, increasingly large concentric circles outside, and that vegetation growth and life returns to normal at different rates depending on how close you were to the center of this big circle that is around Shale Ghul.
We get so little details about how the blight vanishes. Like, it just vanishes, right?
It just vanishes.
What does that even mean? What does vanish actually look like? Like that's one sentence. That's not. No,
it's certainly not helpful. Where are all of the things that were in what was in the blight going to? One of the general principles is that you can't just have stuff disappear. It has to go somewhere.
Yeah. Like, you can take away the evil, like, metaphysical cloud hanging over everything, but what about the actual, like, biomass?
Yeah, like leaky bucket theory. You put stuff in and there are gaps in it and it leaks out somewhere. It doesn't just disappear.
Right, totally. So no wonder Quercus is like, I can spend a couple centuries just wandering the world cataloging, and that'll be a whole career. It'll be great.
He has easily a couple of centuries. He's got a good... Maybe he's a healthy, fit Ogier. He's got 5 centuries in him. He's going to be out rambling and doing that kind of thing, not settling down with a...
Unless we suck him into a more proper adventure.
Yes, unless you do that, or if his mother finds him someone like Erith or another Ogier to settle down with. We don't know. The powers of Mother Ogier are fairly legendary at this stage.
It's true, but she did let him leave.
Well, he was 100, so he could technically have left regardless.
But yeah, who knows? Once you crack 300, it's going to be like time to settle down.
Yeah. I think at one stage, if he gets tired, then he will start thinking about turning his research focus more from exploration to trying to develop some coherent ideas for how forests in the area around Randland could be managed rather than just exploited. Which would, if you develop that kind of idea and some good sustainable principles as to how to manage these natural resources now, whilst there is very little human development, as you pointed out before, then you're in a much better position to do it than when the world is intensely populated and there's lots of pressure on those natural resources.
Yeah, it's a level of square one you really don't find anywhere in our current age of the Earth.
No.
This spoke of the wheel is pretty not square one-ish anymore.
Yes, we should rapidly segue to another topic to avoid me ranting about the current state of our ecosystems and how little.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's like landing on Mars or something and terraforming it. Like it's just open.
Right.
Like you could do anything with it.
Yes.
So that's a really interesting opportunity. It's cool that Quercus wants to steward that maybe a little bit.
I think he's very forward thinking. Yeah, I'm surprised there are not more Ogier like him just wanting to ramble around everywhere. Maybe there are. Maybe Quercus has come from one stedding. He doesn't know whether there are these young Ogier setting out from all across Randland with ideas to establish little Ogier enclaves within Rand schools that he's set up.
Yeah, you'd think that like a lot of Brown sisters would, and whatever the Ashaman equivalent of the academic natural scientists are, like you'd think that like they would want to be collaborating with Ogier because they all have really long lifespans and lots of knowledge.
True. Yeah. Except that we have ample evidence from the book series that whatever would be logical for all of the Arjas of Aes Sedai to be doing based on what their Arja is actually supposed to be doing, they're not going to be doing what optimizes that Arja's success or what that Arja is meant to do. If they're Browns, they're just going to be closeted.
It's a new age.
Yes, it is. We can hope that there's forward thinking in that sense as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully Pimer ends up choosing Brown. Hopefully he ends up doing that, so never know. Might be able to create a new coalition.
Yeah, studying weapons design or something like that.
Yeah, I think he's more of an engineer than a natural scientist, but...
Well, there is a gap in that sense, that which Arja would inventors go into? Are they brown? Or are they blue?
Yeah, I always just assumed it would be brown, but no, I don't think it would be blue. Blues are social scientists.
Yeah, if they were...
I guess white, maybe, because logic to proof your engineering designs.
Right, or green, because you're actually researching or engineering things that are to be used on the battlefield.
Right.
Maybe that's it. There isn't one engineering Arja. It's just that each Arja has the engineering body, which is responsible for doing the engineering that helps that Arja. Like yellows help with medical engineering, and biotech is all of the sisters who are towards that knowledge generation persuasion, but specifically focused on the yellow Arja and white Arja.
Or maybe like the Black Tower ends up taking up really the slack in that department, because I imagine that the Black Tower is going to have to diversify from just like pure military single-mindedness. Like they're going to have to divide out in some fashion. Maybe they end up really holding down the engineering side of things. Pimer's going to end up being the first cross-tower interdisciplinarian.
You might have to headcanon something else for Lore Master.
Yeah. Or, Pimer can just do his own damn thing, because
he likes doing that.
Whatever. Yeah. I mean, Aradia was like, I'm going to be a Brown. And then I created a character that's just completely running away from me. So we'll see where that goes.
It's great, though, that you have a character where you don't know where they're going. Where, you have...
Creativity is a fun horse to ride sometimes.
And also for the listeners, I think that it's nice to know that there is room for unplanned development as well as ideas as to where you have a character going. There's lots of organic potential. Yeah,
sometimes I feel bad I set up a character thinking I knew what Aja I was going for, just because it seems unfair to the progress of the character. But I needed to start somewhere, so whatever. The dice will fall where they may. The trick is to just stay true to what Pimer would do, not what I think he would do. Though that's the same thing. Awkward. I don't know. But I mean, Pilsner started to run away from me by the end of the last campaign. So, I'm happy that it's happening sooner with Pimer.
Yes. Yeah, you're just that much more comfortable, I think, with the premise and what happens. And accepting of it rather than, is that the case? Pilsner was your first character.
Yeah, the sheer learning curve of doing it at all
Right.
definitely has a lot to do with that. But then being familiar with the world does give me more room to think in a more meta sense within the world about what's going on. So I
Yes.
actually know that there are other countries in the world and what their customs are and like stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, you're doing more, I think, of that kind of thinking than Quercus is, he has his research agenda and what he wants to do, and he doesn't know how long the podcast will last, so he's thinking grand. But his day-to-day sort of responses are just that. They are responses. They're not well thought through, regardless of whether an OGA should be.
Oh, I didn't say they're well thought through. Just saying they're well informed.
They're informed, yeah. Informed by something. This is, I mean,
Lord
my
of the Rings
first...
was hard to be informed about.
You've read the books though, haven't you?
Yeah, but that was like when I was a kid.
Okay.
I read The Hobbit again recently, but I didn't marinate in the world. I read the series once as like a 12-year-old, so
Yeah.
it's not quite the same thing.
I love that term, marinating in the world. Yeah, it is interesting having this, seeing the way that you gradually become slightly more comfortable with the way D&D works. So from a new player's perspective, it's a steep learning curve, and gradually you get to this stage where you are slightly more able to react and treat it as a story rather than just panicking that I'm not going to understand a specific mechanic, which is definitely a concern to start with, because D&D has such a fearsome reputation for being quite technical, and there's a rule book which is hundreds of pages long.
Right.
So it's nice when you get up to at least being comfortable enough to just treat it as a story. And like you're saying, I think that helps a lot when you're in the Wheel of Time world than a world which you don't know at all.
Very much so. But I still feel almost as uncertain in it as I ever did. I'm still just like, I don't know what to do. I know I technically am better, but it doesn't feel better. It still feels like chaos.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're getting a really interesting perspective because you got to listen to the first game and now you're
Yes.
playing in the second game,
Which
so you get
was
to see
amazing.
both sides.
Yeah, that has been a really nice experience. And playing now with the characters that I used to laugh along with when I was listening to the podcast at the gym or on a walk or doing work. It's nice to actually engage with them. Although it is very different. It's amazing how the characters are different from this game to the last game. I think everyone you've all been very good at making that difference rather than lapsing into what Pimer or what Pilsner would have done, or with Fate lapsing into what Ryder would have done, which must be a real challenge.
I know, right? Yeah, it's definitely it's challenging. I definitely I've pulled up like Pimer's like story 10 minutes before we start playing to just be like, okay, get into his head.
Yeah.
What's he thinking? What's he wearing? Like what? Because otherwise it would just be Pilsner, which was just me, even shorter packaging than I already have.
Yes.
It's fun though. How we're all different, and Amena and I, or Christine and I, we had that one dynamic with Nimrodel and Pilsner, and now trying to find a similar level of comfort because we're friends, but getting our characters to become friends has been interesting. We had to do a lot of text role play before the game started just to feel like we had rapport that wasn't copy and paste.
Yeah, you did a lot, but it seems to have worked. It now feels very natural to me. Anyway, it seems like you're the novice club on one side, and then there's Lance and I who are beginning to develop our own sort of friendship, partly enforced because of you two being banned from doing anything else. That's a bit of a spoiler for anyone who hasn't read the last episode or listened to the last episode, so I shouldn't.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting once we're all on a slightly longer leash. Well, the three of us that still have leashes, once we're on a longer leash from our respective superiors, it'll be fun when we get to go properly adventuring past this little town.
Yeah, the borders of where we are now.
So I am curious about how we're going to convince you to come with us, because you're going to probably want to stay there for the next 30 years and study.
That's something that I've wondered about as well. I don't know how much of a stickler I should be for what the research side of Quercus versus the side of him that just wants to explore. And, if you are a dedicated researcher, you are going to be both, you have a research interest in a particular topic, in this case the stedding, and also a passion to be doing it. And that isn't necessarily consistent with also being flighty enough that you meet 3 strangers in a town, become friends with them, and then decide to just jettison your research and go and explore the world. So that's a challenge I'm going to either face or just end up being confronted with it in an episode and not have to face it, or face it over a space of 1 minute and just have to make a split-second decision.
Well, maybe this is, like, hint, hint, lore master. You're going to need to find a compelling reason for Quercus to abandon his current plan and go with us. Add some urgency to it that is unique to Quercus's mission.
Someone delivers him a research note from the head Ogier researcher at whichever of the stedding is most well known for its botanical research, and says, I have a pressing need for you to do this, and which just happens to coincide with you 3 going off to do wherever we go. Yeah,
there'll be some Taviran twisting to make that work, no doubt. But there should be some kind of reason. So yeah, lore master, get on that, figure it out.
Yeah, I realize that my priorities have to shift or something like that.
Yeah, some sort of, your supervisor tells you to go somewhere else.
Academic advisor. Right. Don't want to go back to those days just yet, thank you.
Right. Escapism, that's the goal here.
Yeah, it's too recent. So, anything else that we should touch on in terms of setting up Quercus as a character?
Nothing's coming to mind. I just still really want to read his journal about the first time he tried to order food at a bar. I still really want that.
I will write down a journal of him doing that, and then maybe that can be a narrated podcast. He was surprised by the whole experience, and I think he would have been surprised no matter what the experience was, to be quite honest, irrespective of whether it was gambling or whether it was people dancing and him being caught up in a jig or whatever dance they do in that town. Anything would have been new and surprising for him. So
yeah, I have a feeling that will be amazing.
I will try and write that up at some point. It would be, I think, a good idea if each of us did one of these character intro background type things. I think that would be fun, because I know that I have a lot of question marks as to where you and where Amena come from. I don't even recall what your age is, to be quite frank.
Well, we're novices, so probably like in somewhere between 15 and 20, probably closer to 18, 19.
Novice is a meaningless term, though, in terms of age. Sharina and other people in the Wheel of Time proved that.
That's true, but we only came to the tower recently, so we're not like in our 30s, I don't think. I think we're probably, I don't know, actually. I feel like I must have decided that at one point.
I'm sure you must have done.
We're early enough in our and Pymer is not going to have... How quickly does Pymer learn, given that he has a block?
Just some of his comments suggest that he has more of a backstory to me and more of a past than we actually get in the podcast. Like, not to the same extent, but you know how Andral has this long background, and he's always saying things like, oh yeah, I had a go at that, or I was in that place, and he seems to have been around everywhere and done a whole range of different things. And I don't recall what exactly it is that set it off, but I get this sense of that from Pymer, that he has quite a varied background.
Yeah, I've mostly put effort into thinking about how he would have discovered that he can channel, and then what the Aes Sedai would have done in response to man channeling. He probably spent, months being pestered by yellow and brown sisters every moment of the day to get studied. Like, how is this happening? How is this possible? But yeah, I haven't really thought about his life aside from that. Like, he's just like a farm boy that is kind of like, was intrigued with guns before. Like, that was definitely a thing. He was into guns, like probably from, young age. But yeah, I don't really know what happened between. There's some holes there. But I put so much effort into this very narrow window of time
Yeah.
that it feels like there's all this stuff there. But then, yeah, I mean, him and Amena were in the tower for like 6 months or something before getting sent up to Dal Sharandu, where they've been for like 6 months. I don't know, all the units of time are in 6 months, I guess. But yeah, as far as like, was he an apprentice to someone? Did he move out of his hometown? I haven't actually fleshed that out. So yeah, apparently I was actually thinking this as we were getting set up for this, is that it would be cool to have every character do a little bit of a backstory thing. Or like I don't know if you saw in Discord, but someone
Right.
was very asked me a bunch of follow-up questions about Pimer's gender identity versus channeling ability mismatch. And, I was like, oh yeah, here's all these, resources that I read into like about this stuff. So there's definitely a lot to explore there just mechanically. I haven't even thought about his damn backstory beyond Farm Boy goes to the tower.
To be fair, I've sort of fleshed out my Ogier's background in terms of starting at age 100. So there's a reasonable amount of time that could have elapsed. No one knows what baby, I'm using that word in a very loose term, baby and teenage Ogier actually do before they hit full adulthood at 100. Do they just go around in endless progression from, primary school to high school to college to further university to practice speech school, or what happens? What do you do for 100 years without becoming an adult?
Yeah, seriously. It's like a very long time. I mean, like, because Ogiers think at the same speed as people, right? They can carry on conversations. They're not like Ents that take all day to say hello. So, yeah. I guess you just read a lot.
Yes, I've undoubtedly done that, but not even traveled a lot. That's strange. I mean, a stedding isn't that large a place.
Maybe they travel between stedding, like on field trips,
Possibly,
like you're all
yeah,
like tied to a
accompanied
string
by-
in pairs and
Right.
like.
Yes, accompanied by your elders.
Yeah. That seems like you do some inter-stedding travel. Also, like, supposedly by now, Perrin has cleansed the ways. If we take that, the cleansing of the ways story as canon, then that means the ways make it possible to travel and visit more places.
It's very true.
Like, I don't know if Lore
Stedding
Master is
exchanges.
taking that as canon or not, but
Yeah, that could actually have been where Quercus got some of his ideas for adventuring from, where he spotted these differences just anecdotally when he's been travelling to different steadings in the ways, using the ways. Maybe that's where he got the
Right.
spark for thinking, there are some differences in plant life here. Surprise, surprise.
right. And if the ways are cleansed, then they're going to be getting recolonized with plant life, right? Because Loyal says that they
Yes.
used to have all kinds of plants and, spongy grass to sit on and fruit to eat and all that
Yeah.
stuff. So if the ways are cleansed, that's, maybe that was where he got the idea for like checking out
Yeah,
destroyed area
Yeah.
recolonization.
yeah, it's a
Possibly.
good thought. And that opens up a whole other can of worms as to
Lore Master, we have questions.
yes, how does things, you would have to have, it would be almost like primary succession after a major disturbance, because in the ways you only have barren rock. You don't even have soil for anything to grow into. First you would need to get the rock breakdown by bacteria or whatever else, and then you would get plant life coming in. That could take a long time unless they have some way of transporting like hydroponics into the waste that can just survive without any
Right.
soil.
Or, just that's what like the Ogier do for 10 years is just wheelbarrow dirt into the ways. Just a parade of Ogier with wheelbarrows
into the
just
waste,
going
yeah.
in. I mean, maybe, I don't know.
It's so the ways are just they're one of the most interesting areas, concepts, if you can call it that, of the Wheel of Time. I think of any of those sort of great unknowns out there,
Yeah.
thinking about how the ways have occurred, how they were tainted, what dimension they live in, is probably the one that's most frequently stimulated me.
Yeah, because it's not as much of just a magic hand wavy thing. Like there's actually some sense of mechanics for it and like space time folding quantum something
Yeah.
something. Less of the dream weirdness and more of the like there is more to reality than meets the eye kind of thing.
Yeah, very definitely. It's a topic for another conversation, but it's fascinating. Really do.
Yeah. I need to read Fire in the Ways. I haven't read it yet.
Which is that?
That's the short story that Brandon
Oh, you haven't read
wrote.
it?
No.
Oh.
I know it's been posted and I probably opened the link up to it and then closed
Okay.
the tab and I've never actually, I think I read like a couple paragraph teaser excerpt from like before it got published.
Okay.
Like I feel like I did read some I don't know, a blurb, but I haven't read the whole thing properly. So, you know, you need to go read the Shara story. I need to go read Fire in the Ways.
Definitely. I need to remember what it's called as well.
But yeah, that could be another cool discussion to just get a bunch of people to, what are the ways?
That's a discussion maybe for SpoilerCon 2020 for anyone who's listening in Portland, October 2020. This is something we should put on the agenda.
Oh, that's a good idea. That'd be a good round table because 2 people talking it out are not going to get very far, but 20 people talking it out.
We have some space for
creative ideas.
Some potential for debates there. So if anyone is interested, then just let us know. We should make it happen.
Yeah, bring your Mobius strips and get ready to talk.
Perfect.
And that is where we close the book for now. Come join us next time on Just Roll With It.
I have got some Excel files with information, but I need to find they are open. I've just got masses of other tabs with Songbird data analysis open, so I need to close those as well.
As all good ogres should. Spreadsheets of Songbird
data analysis.
Songbird analysis. It's absolutely fabulous.
It's fabulous up to the point where you realize that lots of the data analysis for wildlife population biology is incredibly annoying, incredibly difficult as well. Obviously, the basic Excel analysis is not difficult, but when you start running models in R and whatever other statistical software you're using, then it gets complicated. The models.
Yeah, this is where I back away screaming.
There's so much simpler generally to stick to plants rather than anything that moves or movement is the problem.
Yeah, this is why I prefer geology. Rocks really don't.
Exactly. I mean,
they do
they're
sometimes,
all viscous,
but then it's
aren't they? A spectrum. Even extremely solid rhyolitic lava is still moving. It's still oozing out of a volcano, but very slowly until it explodes.
This is true. And then occasionally you have earthquakes and, you have lots of movement all at once.
Yep.
Or really excellent landslides and rock falls. Those are pretty fast.
But apart from that, generally
they tend to hold still while you study them.
Yeah. And if they don't, then you don't really know about it because a pyroclastic flow has just moved over your head and you don't know much about it.
Yeah, no, then you've got the more like omnipresent, I have gone back into the ether sort of perspective. You can't do research from there.
It's quite a Shinaran perspective there, returning to Mother Earth, the embrace of the mother, or whatever they call it.
Yeah, the violent, crushing embrace of the mother.
Yeah, very violent. Anyway, so I've got all of my notes in front of me now.
Hey, you. Yeah, you. Are you enjoying Just Roll With It? Do you want to keep up with all of the shenanigans and updates and maybe interact with us online? Follow us on Twitter at @just_roll or Instagram at @JustRollWithItPodcast with underscores between each word. Are you interested in maybe earning cool gaming dice or other awesome perks? Our Patreon is patreon.com/JRWI. We use Sirenscape for all of our sound effects and are a production of Fox and Raven Media.